They're aggressive now. What should we do?
Sheri Bradley. It began as a simple welfare check on a quiet Virginia property. A local woman hadn't been seen or heard from in days. Deputies stepped past the rusted gate, unaware they were walking into one of the most disturbing scenes of their careers. Inside the pen, just yards from her own back door, lay the body of 57-year-old Sheri Bradley, mauled and partially consumed by the very animals she had devoted her life to raising. She believed she could tame them, love them, live among them, but nature doesn't always obey. This is the horrifying final chapter of Sheri Bradley, devoured by her hybrid Wolfdogs. If you care about wildlife, exotic pets, or simply want to know how a lifelong passion turned into a deadly nightmare, stick around. Welcome to the Animal Quest. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share so more people hear stories like this one. Wait, let me take you back to the beginning. Sheri Lynn Bradley was the kind of woman most people hardly noticed. Quiet, private, and always keeping to herself. Tucked away in a modest, wooded property just outside Mount Jackson, a small town in Shenandoah County, Virginia, Sheri lived a life that many would consider isolated, but to her it was peaceful. Her world didn't revolve around social gatherings or trips into town. It revolved around the animals behind the wire fencing in her backyard. Animals most people wouldn't dare to keep as pets. Sheri was 57 years old, unmarried, and lived alone. Over the years, her neighbors grew used to the distant howls that echoed through the trees at night. Some dismissed them as regular dogs. Others knew better. They whispered about the woman on the hill who kept wolves, or something close to it. And they were right. For more than a decade, Sheri had devoted herself to raising hybrid Wolfdogs, animals that are part domesticated dog and part wild wolf. To her, they weren't dangerous. They were misunderstood. She often described them as family. On social media, she posted photos of herself smiling beside them, cuddling pups, bottle-feeding newborns, and writing in long, emotional captions about trust, loyalty, and respect between human and animal. But what Sheri saw as a spiritual connection, others saw as a ticking time bomb. You see, hybrid Wolfdogs are not like regular pets. They live in a behavioral gray area, too wild to be fully tamed, too domesticated to survive in the wild. They often retain unpredictable instincts, especially around food, territory, and dominance. Sheri knew this. She wasn't naive, but she believed her bond with them was stronger than instinct. She believed they saw her as one of their own. Over the years, some locals raised concerns. There were reports of fencing that looked weak, concerns about whether she had the proper permits, and more than one visit from local animal control. But nothing ever escalated to the point of seizure or fines. Sheri defended herself passionately every time. These weren't wild beasts, she argued. These were her companions, her babies. But behind closed doors, things weren't always harmonious. At least once, a visitor claimed to have seen one of the larger males snap at Sheri during feeding. Another neighbor remembered a chilling sound, a low, bone-deep growl that came from behind the trees late one night. "It was no dog," he said. "That sound stays with you." Still, Sheri remained undeterred. She added new enclosures, built makeshift dens from lumber and tarps, and continued living alone among the animals she loved most. No one could convince her that these creatures might one day turn on her. But in the summer of 2023, all of that changed. Sheri Bradley wasn't just a victim of an animal attack. She was a victim of trust. Trust placed in animals whose wild instincts had never truly left them. And by the time anyone realized how wrong things had gone, it was already far too late. Hybrid Wolfdogs are unlike any other pet. They exist in a space that defies simple classification, part wild wolf, part domestic dog, and entirely unpredictable. At first glance, many people mistake them for huskies or German shepherd mixes, but behind those eyes lies a powerful lineage, one shaped not by human hands, but by the raw instincts of survival, dominance, and pack mentality. And when that instinct surfaces, no amount of training can truly tame it. Sheri Bradley knew exactly what she was raising. She often defended her animals online, writing that they were misunderstood, not monsters, that they simply needed love, boundaries, and respect. But experts across the country have said the opposite, that hybrid wolf dogs are inherently unstable. Even experienced handlers warn that no two hybrids behave the same way. Some may act docile for years, only to suddenly snap over a challenge to their dominance, the presence of food, or even a simple shift in routine. The law surrounding these animals is just as unstable. In the state of Virginia, ownership of wolfdog hybrids is legal, but there's no uniform statewide regulation. It's left up to each individual county to decide what's allowed and what's not. In Shenandoah County, where Sheri lived, the ordinances were murky. There was no clear policy requiring registration and no strict enforcement of exotic animal rules. That loophole allowed people like Sheri to build private menageries without much oversight. By the time anyone noticed what was happening behind the trees on her property, she had acquired at least 10 wolf dogs, maybe more. Some sources reported as many as 13 at one point, and yet there were no visible kennel licenses posted, no breeding permits filed. According to investigators, Sheri did not have the proper paperwork for the number or type of hybrid animal she was keeping, and that wasn't all. Several of her enclosures were homemade, built from scrap fencing and repurposed livestock panels, rather than reinforced materials approved for exotic animal containment. There were concerns about structural integrity, especially given the strength and determination of wolf dogs in a pack. Animal control officers had reportedly visited her property in the past, though it's unclear how often or what action, if any, was taken. Like many rural jurisdictions, Shenandoah County lacked the resources to track and monitor every potential exotic animal situation. Unless there was an active threat to public safety, cases like Sheri's often slipped through the cracks. According to a former exotic animal control consultant familiar with hybrid wolf dogs, it's not just about how much experience the owner has. These animals don't see you as their master, they see you as part of a pack. And in every pack, dominance gets challenged eventually. It's not a question of if, it's a matter of when. Sheri, it seemed, believed she had earned their loyalty. But in the absence of clear legal boundaries, regulatory enforcement, or structural safeguards, she was left to manage a growing, unstable pack, entirely alone. And somewhere along the way, the animals she loved began to view her not as their protector, but as something else entirely. By early 2023, the signs were no longer subtle. Residents living along Mount Clifton Road, just outside the town limits of Mount Jackson, began to notice the sounds. Not the usual barking of backyard pets, but low, guttural growls, ear-piercing howls, and something else that was harder to describe, the chaotic chorus of fighting. One neighbor, who asked not to be named, later told investigators, "It didn't sound like dogs. It was deeper, wild, like something that didn't belong here." Some nights the sounds would go on for hours, growling, yelping, thudding impacts against fencing. More than one neighbor reported hearing what they described as violent scuffles, like the animals were turning on each other, or worse, preparing to turn on someone else. Local authorities began receiving anonymous calls, concerned voices urging them to do a welfare check or investigate the animals. One caller was recorded saying, "I've told her before, those aren't dogs. One day something bad is going to happen." Animal control had in fact visited the property before. While exact records weren't made public, officials later confirmed that concerns had been raised about the number of animals, the structural safety of her enclosures, and whether she possessed the necessary licenses for keeping wolfdog hybrids. But Sheri, consistent in her beliefs, reportedly pushed back. She claimed the animals were healthy, that their enclosures were secure, and that she was caring for them responsibly. And legally, given the loopholes in Shenandoah County's hybrid ownership laws, there was little that could be done unless the animals posed an immediate danger to the public. Behind the fence, however, the pack dynamic was shifting. Wolf dogs are pack animals. They form hierarchies. And in the absence of a clear leader, they will challenge anyone who threatens the balance, even the human who raised them. Experts say that with multiple intact males living together, especially in close quarters, the chances of aggression rise significantly. Fights can erupt over food, territory, mating rights, or even perceived weakness. And with aging handlers, animals may pick up on subtle cues, a slower step, a dropped bucket, a lapse in assertiveness, and begin to see opportunity. Sheri was not young, and she was alone. She had no staff, no volunteers, just herself and the belief that love would always be enough. But by the spring of 2023, that belief was showing signs of strain. Visitors to her property recalled seeing scratches on her arms, bruises on her hands, and a growing weariness in her voice. Still, she brushed it off. Just roughhousing, she'd say. Just play. She insisted she had full control, but no one really controls a hybrid pack. Not forever. More than one person urged her to reduce the number of animals or rehome some of them, but Sheri always refused. In her eyes, they were hers, her family, her mission. But outside that fence, more and more people were beginning to fear it was only a matter of time. August 30th, 2023. The air in Shenandoah County was still. A typical late summer morning, humid, quiet, uneventful. But something wasn't right on the small rural property just off Mount Clifton Road, where Sheri L. Bradley lived alone among her hybrid Wolfdogs. A friend had been trying to get in touch with her for days. Text messages, phone calls, no response. At first, it didn't seem too unusual. Sheri often went off-grid, spending hours, sometimes days, tending to her animals, fixing fencing, or simply unplugging from the outside world. But by the third day, concern turned into fear. That morning, a welfare check was officially requested to the Shenandoah County Sheriff's Office. Deputies were dispatched just after 10 a.m. They pulled up the long gravel driveway, their tires crunching slowly over loose stones. No barking, no howling, just silence. The front yard was overgrown. A few old tools leaned against a shed. One of the front porch lights was still on. And there, beyond a makeshift chain-link barrier, stood a row of enclosures. Pen after pen, quiet, still, and locked. The deputies called out. No answer. They moved closer to the back of the property where the largest enclosure stood. A broad, rusted structure with fencing nearly 8 feet high. Inside, there was movement. At first, it was hard to see. One of the Wolfdogs paced along the inside of the pen, tail low, hackles raised. A second one growled. Deputies noticed the ground was disturbed. Large patches of dirt turned over, tufts of fur scattered, and something else. A shoe. Then just beyond the far end of the enclosure, they saw it. A body. It was Sheri Bradley. She was lying face down inside the pen, her clothing torn and shredded, her limbs partially mauled. Multiple animals circled the area around her. Some appeared to be guarding the body. Others were feeding. The deputies immediately called for backup and animal control. Guns drawn, they approached cautiously, careful not to provoke the animals. But it was too late. Sheri was already gone. Pronounced dead at the scene, Sheri L. Bradley, 57 years old, had died in the very pen where she had spent years building trust with the creatures she loved most. The same creatures now stood over her body, stained with her blood, snarling at the intruders who had come to take her away. The scene was gruesome beyond words. Blood spattered the fencing. Strips of torn fabric clung to the wire. Deep scratch marks were visible in the dirt, where a struggle had clearly taken place. It wasn't just an attack. It had been a feeding frenzy. One officer later told investigators, "It's one of the worst things I've ever seen. You don't forget something like that." The quiet property, long dismissed by neighbors as just a strange woman's hobby, had become the scene of a fatal animal mauling, one that would send shockwaves through Virginia and beyond. The forensic analysis began immediately. Deputies secured the scene as investigators from the Shenandoah County Sheriff's Office and animal control personnel assessed the enclosure. What they found painted a picture of unimaginable violence and a tragic, preventable end. Sheri Bradley, according to the medical examiner's report, had suffered multiple bite wounds across her limbs, torso, and head. Some were shallow, others were deep enough to expose bone. What struck investigators most was the variety of bite patterns, evidence that this had not been a single aggressor attack. This was a coordinated mauling by a pack, and perhaps most shocking of all, forensic signs suggested Sheri had still been alive when the attack began. There were defensive wounds on her forearms. Her knuckles were scraped raw, as if she had tried to shield herself, to push back. Deep drag marks showed she may have tried to crawl away. But it wasn't enough. The animals were stronger, and they were no longer seeing her as their caregiver. Experts brought in later would point to pack behavior, the complex hierarchy that governs social interaction among canids. In any group of wolves or hybrids, there are dominant individuals and submissive ones. That structure is fluid, always shifting, and when a leader falters or appears weak, the rest of the pack can turn. Sheri, age 57, may have entered the enclosure during a period of increased pack tension, possibly around feeding time. Reports suggest she typically brought food to the animals in large metal buckets, often walking directly into the pen to distribute it. She had done this for years, but on that particular day, the balance tipped. Perhaps one of the alpha males challenged her. Perhaps two lower-ranking members began to fight, and her presence triggered a shift in focus. Or perhaps, most likely of all, food aggression sparked a frenzy. Food aggression is common in wolf hybrids, especially in confined settings. Once one animal becomes possessive or agitated, the entire pack can spiral into violence, redirecting their instincts toward anything moving, even the human who just moments ago was delivering dinner. Investigators found what was left of a tipped-over bucket near the body. Scattered inside the enclosure were fragments of raw meat and kibble. A partially chewed boot lay nearby. There was no sign of a weapon, no radio, no one to call for help. Sheri Bradley had walked into that pen alone, as she had countless times before. But this time something changed. Her authority, once unquestioned, was now ignored. And once the attack began, it unfolded with shocking speed. According to forensic experts, the attack likely lasted only a few minutes, long enough for her to fight back, to fall, and to be overwhelmed. What began as a routine act of care ended in horror. The very animals she had raised from pups, the creatures she had defended, loved, and trusted, had turned into a unified force of instinct. And in that moment, no amount of experience, compassion, or familiarity could save her. Sheri Bradley's final moments were marked by confusion, fear, and the unforgiving reality of nature unchecked. The hours following the discovery of Sheri Bradley's body would leave a permanent scar on the quiet community of Mount Jackson, Virginia. As deputies backed away from the enclosure, the question no one wanted to ask became unavoidable. What would happen to the animals? The answer came quickly, and without alternatives. The Wolfdogs were showing continued aggression, even after Sheri's death. Animal control specialists noted their behavior, snapping, lunging, circling the body as if guarding it or asserting dominance. Any attempt to retrieve Sheri's remains was met with snarling resistance. After consultation with Shenandoah County Sheriff's deputies, it was determined that all the hybrid wolf dogs would be euthanized on site. It wasn't a decision made lightly, but the imminent threat to human life, coupled with the animal's unpredictable and highly escalated state, left officials with no other choice. One by one, 13 hybrid wolf dogs were put down. The air that afternoon was thick with disbelief. By nightfall, news of the tragedy had spread far beyond Shenandoah County. A woman found dead in her own backyard, mauled by the very animals she raised. Authorities confirm 13 wolfdog hybrids euthanized after gruesome fatal attack. Cable news anchors used words like shocking, horrific, and unimaginable. But for those who had known Sheri, or at least watched from a distance, it wasn't entirely a surprise. Some neighbors, especially those who had called animal control in the past, felt a grim vindication. "We knew something like this could happen," one resident told reporters. "Those weren't dogs, they were wild. It was just a matter of time." Others were more sympathetic. They saw Sheri not as reckless, but as tragically misunderstood. A woman who had loved too much, trusted too far, and fallen through the cracks of a legal system that barely regulated exotic animal ownership. In the days that followed, public debate erupted. Who was to blame? Was it Sheri herself, who defied warnings, lived in isolation, and kept a pack of powerful animals without sufficient containment? Or was it a system that allowed her to do so unchecked? Sheri's death and the slaughter of 13 animals became more than just a local tragedy. It ignited questions across the state and the country about how we define pets and where we draw the line between domestication and danger. What no one could deny was that a line had been crossed, and there was no way to take it back. Sheri Bradley's death wasn't just a tragedy for Shenandoah County, it was a national wake-up call, because this wasn't the first time a wolf-dog hybrid had killed, and if things didn't change, it wouldn't be the last. Animal behavior experts were quick to speak out. Dr. Lindsay Acker, a specialist in canid behavior from North Carolina State University, explained the deeper issue. These aren't dogs, and they're not wolves either. What they are is something in between, an animal that doesn't quite know its place. That makes them dangerously unpredictable. Unlike traditional dogs, wolfdog hybrids often retain powerful predatory instincts, complex pack behaviors, and a high sensitivity to stress. While some may be raised in domestic environments and seem calm for years, their triggers can be sudden and explosive. And Sheri wasn't alone in misjudging that risk. In Texas, 2022, a man named Jason Caldwell was fatally attacked after attempting to break up a fight between two of his hybrid wolf dogs. He had owned them for over a decade. One of them had even been featured in local TV segments as a rescue success story. Just a year earlier, in rural Oregon, 2021, a teenage girl was seriously injured, her leg shredded, after stepping too close to a hybrid enclosure while visiting a family friend's property. The animal had shown no warning signs. Each time the same debate surfaced, and each time, little changed. Virginia's own laws at the time of Sheri's death were shockingly relaxed. The state permitted hybrid wolf dogs, but left regulation to the counties. In Shenandoah County, no clear licensing requirements existed for the number of animals Sheri had kept. There were no mandatory inspections, no specialized enclosures required, and no accountability once the animals were inside the fence. Following the attack, Sheriff Tim Carter of Shenandoah County made a public statement. This is a deeply disturbing case. It raises serious questions about exotic pet ownership and what should or shouldn't be allowed in residential settings. The community demanded answers, but state officials hesitated. Lawmakers were quick to offer condolences, but reluctant to introduce restrictions that could upset rural voters or exotic pet owners across the state. And so the central question echoed across the headlines. Should private citizens be allowed to keep animals that are only half domesticated? For every advocate insisting these animals can be raised safely, there's a tragedy like Sheri Bradley's that says otherwise. Her case, as brutal as it was, wasn't about a freak accident. It was about an inevitable collision between instinct and illusion, between the wild and the world we pretend to control. And now, with her story in the spotlight, the country was left wondering, how many more warnings would it take before something changes? Sheri L. Bradley wasn't reckless. She wasn't cruel or careless. She was, by all accounts, deeply devoted to the animals she raised, animals she saw not as threats, but as family. To her, they weren't predators. They were her companions, her passion, her purpose. The fencing still stands, rusted and crooked. The feed buckets are gone. The 13 animals she raised gone too. And so is Sheri. Her death is more than a tragedy. It's a cautionary tale, a shocking reminder that when we blur the line between wild and domestic, we take a risk not just with our lives, but with the lives of others around us. Sheri Bradley believed she could tame the wild, but nature doesn't always obey. If this story moved you, share it, not for views, not for shock, but to start the conversation that could save someone's life. Because some animals are not meant to be pets, no matter how much we love them. Thanks for watching. If you believe in responsible pet ownership, or if you want more true stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. And leave a comment below. Should hybrid wolf dogs be allowed as pets? We'll see you in the next video.